All right. Thank you very much, Achim, for the nice introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Braegelmann. I'm just a lawyer, so don't expect any technological expertise here, but unfortunately, or maybe greatly, lawyers are also interested in the subject of blockchain, distributed ledger technology, smart contracts, and they have an opinion on this. And you might not like it, and maybe it's not relevant, but I can present you some legal views that interest lawyers, and I myself, I'm a restructuring lawyer. I also was recently general counsel at Leverton, doing more stuff with artificial intelligence and extracting data, but this is in a way my core expertise. Bankruptcy, so maybe I see everything from a bankruptcy angle, for better or worse, and I hope that's interesting. So why is this even relevant? Blockchains are going to be used for kind of internet of value and will be used to transfer assets of certain value. So we're dealing with economics here and with ideas, or in a way business ventures that try to make a profit in the future. And these things go wrong, everybody knows that. And then the question is always, what happens then? Do we just leave everything back in a digital ruin, or do we try to salvage something? And can we do this with the currently available technological setup? Let's see. I think I don't need to introduce much about how blockchain technology works, but maybe I can just jump off some principle of bankruptcy or insolvency law to, in a way, make clear why I think there are some relevant issues here, or things here. Why do we have bankruptcy law, insolvency law? And this is all under the presumption that law is relevant at all, okay? If you come from a train of thought that law is not relevant in the law, in the realm of blockchain, that's fine. I can't change that opinion probably if you have that. For me, as a lawyer, I'm probably predisposed to think that law is relevant, and if it is relevant, then all of law is relevant, and so also bankruptcy law. So that's my presumption. If you don't share it, fine. Okay, so why do we have bankruptcy insolvency law? Usually when you have a conflict in a transaction, in an economic transaction, you go to court or you go to arbitration or you settle in one way or other. What happens if you have a company or a person who is in a way just foundering under the burden of debt or just transactions failing? Then it could become unfair if someone is in a way knows more than someone else. It's like, you know, the famous Schlecker insolvency or Lehman Brothers. If you knew before, or with Intel, I mean, Intel has now this horrible glitch in the computer chips, and everybody knows that I think the CEO of Intel, knowing that there was this horrible mistake in the chips made since 1995, sold all of his stock that he could sell. Right, so if you have inside knowledge, especially if you know that the company is failing, you might try to get out earlier than others. At a certain point, that's unfair. So then you have laws everywhere in every developed economy to make sure that everybody is treated equally, and some kind of court system or trustee takes over, so that you don't have a race to the courthouse. The first one who's there, in a way, takes all the assets away, gets satisfied to 100%, and the others get nothing. So everybody gets the same quota. That's the idea. If you have a situation where a company or some kind of a business venture is failing, you want to make sure that creditors are treated equally. That's one of the core principles of bankruptcy law. Again, if you don't share that, that's fine. It's just what bankruptcy lawyers think is a great principle, that if something is failing, then all the creditors are in the same boat and they should all share equally. Another thing of bankruptcy or insolvency law and restructuring law, that's another term for it, is preserving value. Back in the day, if you couldn't pay your debt, they put you in jail until you died, or usually your family would then pay the debts, something, or a friend or somebody. And debtor's prison was around everywhere, and if someone couldn't pay his or her debts, or a company it failed, it was usually just liquidated. Just you stopped doing everything, and then the assets were sold off. That's not really a great thing to do in the modern economy. The Americans came up when something new was developed in the 19th century, or maybe later, but in the 19th century, in the United States, they were building the big train tracks from the East Coast to the West Coast. In a way, the first train companies were like Facebook or the Facebooks of today, right? The big ventures, crazy idea to build train tracks over the Rocky Mountains and all that worked well. Then after a while, these companies were failing. And then under the usual old rules, you would have sold the trains for scrap, taken the tracks away, and everything is gone. And everybody realized that's really not great. The tracks are there, the trains are there. Everybody needs this to be going on. It's just a problem that the company has too much debt. And a new idea, in a way, was born to not just liquidate everything, destroy everything if something failed, but to see if you can preserve not only the physical assets, but the organization. And just kick the old creditors maybe out, the banks out, and bring new ones in. So that's, in a way, a rather modern idea. Many say it comes from the US, preserving value in assets and preserving maybe a whole organization. You might have heard of the Air Berlin insolvency right now. There it was not possible. But even there, they sold part of the organization. Even if they changed the legal form, they transferred whole crews and planes to a new company. They didn't just flew all the airplanes to the scrapyard and, in a way, took them apart and then melted and put them in the smelter. So another thing is a fresh start and a discharge. So if you realize an organization is by itself great and maybe it fulfills a public value and people are employed, it's just over indebted or it is not able to make enough money to pay off its old debt, maybe you can have a fresh start and get rid of all the debt. That's in a way what Boris Becker is right now doing in England. He did a lot of bad business decisions, but I think he's now, how old is he, 55, so he has still some life ahead of him as commentator to make money. So why burden him for the rest of his life with horrible debt that he will never be able to pay off? Will be a disincentive for him to work much if he has no chance of becoming debt-free. So the idea is if you see that somebody or a company is overburdened with debt, it might be from a social, from a societal point useful to grant a discharge, because then there's another incentive to use your assets or your intelligence or your organizational powers to create more value. So we don't have punishment of a debtor anymore, and we try to resolve things in order to make sure that a situation created by maybe business decisions that were not as successful as seemed, make sure that that's not destroying everything. Those are the principles. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much about this, but that's in a way we're coming from. And now let's put this in the blockchain context. I mean, probably everybody's aware of the famous decentralized autonomous organization that Christoph Jensch of Slocket and others started in 2016, this venture capital fund that was advertised as, in a way, the greatest social experiment ever. $160 million equivalent in Ether were put into that, and they advertised it as a company run by itself by immutable and unstoppable code. And they told me, that's great. And I said, that's probably not great, because law or company law is always changeable. If something goes wrong, that's one of the principles of economic or of any business law or bankruptcy law, that if you realize you made a bad decision, things don't go so well, you change, maybe consensually or maybe with the help of a court or a bankruptcy procedure, you change the rules. But with the DAO, for instance, in 2016, you couldn't, because the code was law, the code couldn't be changed. Everybody knew what then knows what happened. They had this so-called hack or not hack, and then they had a hard fork on the blockchain to resolve it there. So even there, they changed later the rules. However, that's what we're up against. Modern transactions via blockchains are done via smart contracts or via ICOs running on blockchains, are being programmed. And the question is, do we already have a level of programming there that is pliable enough so that we can, in a way, use the benefits that are offered by law or by organizational ideas to make sure that we are always as flexible as possible to preserve assets, if that's what you care about. If you don't care about preserving assets and value, then you might say, to hell with it, let it all run its course and deal with the digital ruin. However, you saw the principles of bankruptcy law that I stated here, And that's very general. I worked as a bankruptcy lawyer in New York City and in Germany, so that's in a way my impression of it. Other countries have other impressions, but these are in a way general principles. However, of course, we're dealing with over 190 jurisdictions in the world who have different laws. Even in the EU, it's not fully harmonized, and that is, of course, a big mismatch with any blockchain-run transaction or organization that is, if some people would say, transnational, or in a way organized in a way that it is almost everywhere. And as in every context, when you deal with law and blockchain, the question is always, what law do you apply? Some people, of course, say no law applies because it's everywhere, to which others would reply every law applies, and you're subject to 190 or 210, I lost count, how many jurisdictions do we have? Jurisdictions, and maybe that's not great. However, that's not so unusual. In other economic contexts, you also have the problem that maybe you're subject to more laws than you think. I once did a bit more antitrust law, and they always had a list of all the antitrust legislations in the world, and there was always Zambia and other countries that had very low thresholds, and it was very often the case that if you had a merger happening in Europe and you had some business, especially via the internet, then you would violate a lot of African antitrust laws, and people just didn't care or were aware of it and couldn't do anything about it. So in a way, the fact that that something is run via an international public, I'm talking mostly about public blockchains here, it's an issue, and I don't know how to deal with that. It's just, it's something you have to be aware of, that many laws will apply. So, what do we do? If we have something like a decentralized autonomous organization, something that's probably going to be relevant in 2018 as well, and people are participating in it from all over the world, then of course from a blockchain perspective you could again say, we're just on the blockchain, we're not legally relevant. Of course others might say otherwise and say, no, you created some kind of legal entity under German law, bürgerliche Gesellschaft bürgerlichen Rechts, or some kind of general company under US law. It depends. The question is, if that's the case, and then for some reason you cannot fulfill your obligations that you agree to, which bankruptcy law does then apply? Again, people would say it's so complicated that people, like I think in the DAO, 17,000 people from all over the world participated. You could say it's impossible to find who's in charge. However, lawyers and judges don't operate that way. They usually will find someone, and that someone might say, you got the wrong one, and they will say, they always say that we got the wrong one, and they will still deal with you. So if you, I think, set up something, any kind of a company that is run via blockchain, and is, when it's not so clear where it actually is in a legal sense. You could always say, when lawyers say, oh, this company is in Germany, you can always say, what do you mean by that? That's when, like in Air Berlin, they had an Austrian daughter, Niki, this airline, and now the German and the Austrian courts are fighting where that company is. I mean, I think it's 26 planes. So is it where the 26 planes are all over in the world? What does that mean? But lawyers care a lot about this, where a company is, and because then they know which laws to apply. So, but that would be something to look out for. Now, what is very important, if you run into a company crisis and you realize that you might not be able to pay everybody off, and people are trying to get to you, get your personal assets, get to whatever they can claim, you might seek court relief. That's what you can do in Germany and the US. In a court, you might go file a bankruptcy petition, and then under US law and also under German law, you can have something like an automatic stay where the judge or the court system just says, stop, no transactions, we have to do a stop here, this is in crisis mode, we have to make sure that this is getting orderly, like in Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers was failing, they tried to save it, and then they couldn't, and then I think on September 15 in 2017 they filed for bankruptcy, which, why did this shock the financial system so much? Because of the automatic stay on the US law that in a way mandates, if you file for bankruptcy, everything is stopped, of course only legally. And then you have an issue like, what do you do if you've agreed to some transactions on a blockchain, be it real estate interactions, payments to your employees and whatever, and your code is not programmed in a way to, adhere to that. What do you do? I mean, if you have like, as a regular company, you have to pay your employees, and then you file for bankruptcy, and then you tell your bank, you know, we file for bankruptcy and we cannot pay the salaries. And then the bank will say, all right, it's probably not enough money on the bank account anyhow, but maybe there is. What do you do if the software that you've created run via an unstoppable, immutable organization run on a blockchain? What if that goes on? I don't know if you know this poem by Goethe about the sorcerer's apprentice, der Zauberlehrling. It's like, in a way, you set everything in motion, and then you want to stop it, and you can't, right? And then courts might find you liable for this if your organization is still losing assets or transacting, even though by law it shouldn't, right? As a bankruptcy lawyer, of course, I care about this a lot. Very often people who are in business only get to know these rules when they're really close to them, and then they say, oh, dear me. Another thing is, what we very often find in commerce is that so-called ipso facto clauses, or in German insolvenzbedingte Lösungsklauseln, something if you put this in a contract that you're happy to do business with someone, but like rent, you have a company and she rents premises in your office building, but if the company is then failing to pay rent, you might want to terminate that lease and kick the company out, because it's not paying rent anyhow, and you in Berlin in the office market, it will be very easy to find a new tenant there. However, if that company in between files for bankruptcy gets some breathing space, it's allowed to, under German law, for instance, not to pay rent for 2 or 3 months, and try to reorganize and not be kicked out because the company might need the office premises. That's very tough for the landlord, but that's what the law says. And how do you square this? What do you do if, for instance, you've programmed your smart contracts or your organization in a way that if an oracle says, okay, there's a bad situation here, rent is not being paid for the 2nd or 3rd time in a row, so the agreement is released, assets are transferred back and everything is unwound because you programmed it that way. Normal paper contracts often have these clauses and they're invalid. But however, we're not talking just about paper clauses on paper that in a way would then not be executed. These will be executed in a way by the world computer that is run on this specific public blockchain. How do you square that? Very often you'll just create liabilities, and or you might be prosecuted. What I find interesting, if you run something like a business via a public blockchain, and so you are in commerce, this is one of the backgrounds that you're working against. In bankruptcy and insolvency law is one of the fundamental, in a way, legal fundamentals of any developed economy. And I'm just, in a way, trying to raise some awareness here that some rules might make sense, and if the software, the code is not pliable enough to take care of this, then maybe we need some nimbler programming. Okay, next thing. I'm sorry. Achim, how much time do I have? Achim? 5 minutes. Okay. Oh, let me speed up. Another, in a way, not so interesting thing is really right now many people are holding their assets in some kind of crypto asset, in some kind of cryptocurrency. So for a regular insolvency administrator or the tax authorities, they look as if they have nothing when actually they have a lot of assets. I think we have cases in England where husbands were, in a way, who did not want to pay child support or alimony, in a way, transferred everything early enough into some kind of cryptocurrency. And they were happy with the exchange, the rate risk, because on paper they looked very poor and they didn't have to pay anything. I think that'll be an issue for, in a way, computer forensics, for forensic specialists who will find this. Another case currently we have a case in Frankfurt, I think, where they somebody, I think, in some criminal activity, they found bitcoins, and the police got a hold of them and they held them. question is really, how did they hold them? Of course, they didn't hold them in the police station, okay, but apparently they kept the keys somewhere, and now they're trying to sell these off because they've risen in value a lot. And of course they could, physically they could, they have the keys, they can sell this, but the question is really, are they allowed to? Okay, there's so much dealing going on with cryptocurrencies at all, but imagine the police found cocaine, 2 tons. Could they then sell it off for a profit? No. Okay, so they're currently scratching their head. Of course, is this really an asset that they could legally sell? Probably yes, but do you want to be the person in the public authority to make that decision and risk your ass? I'm not so sure. So that's the issue. So very soon, if things will fail, and I bet things will fail because things very often fail, and then if you want to preserve value, there will be people taking over things, and even if they get a hold on it and can change the course of how the software is maybe programmed and all that, are they really allowed to do this or not, especially if they have some kind of public function? So I think 3 more minutes. Let me race through this. I think we covered the first one already. It's very nice if transactions work in a way, in the pre-programmed way. That's one of the beauties of in a way, the whole blockchain ecosystem, that you can have not only data-centric contracts, contracts that tell the system what they are about, but also contracts that are computable, that operate by themselves as far as they can. But then sometimes you have the law that says under certain conditions, these things have to stop. Very often these conditions are not programmed in a way that they would be an oracle that would tell the smart contract on the blockchain that they have to stop, because there can be so many reasons for that, and maybe you need to have some stopgap measures in any kind of code to make sure that you can take care of this. Another thing is, sometimes my friends from the whole blockchain scene tell me that if an asset has been transferred, like a ether or something, it's gone, and then you can do nothing about it. But however, as long as this is not anonymized, you can tell who transferred to whom. And if someone was not allowed to transfer a digital asset but still did anyhow, under the law, it's usually not a defense that you don't have it. If you sell me, if I have your car, you loaned it to me, I was allowed to use it on the weekend, and then I sell it to someone, it's not a legal defense to say I don't have it anymore. You would say, come on, you sold it, right? Give me what you got for it. And I say, I sold it for €5. And they say, that's not okay. And then I have to pay you damages, or in a way the value that was in there. And these rules will also apply in this space. So if by law you cannot, not by law, if by the way you've programmed things or things are working, you cannot get back what you transferred in this whole system, that does not exonerate you. You might still be personally liable to replace the value that you took hold of illegally. One more thing. Oh, yeah. Interestingly enough, the European Union is, right, that's in a way almost my last point here. The European Union is very active in this regard, and in a way, in a very positive way. In 2017, there was a consultation on the digitization of company law. I don't know how many founders are here, but if you believe in incorporating your business, then you probably have to found a German limited liability company or an UG, which works a lot on paper, I hear, and is in a way a very cumbersome organization to run nowadays, especially if you're used to much more flexible ways to work. And the EU, the Germans are, I think they don't care so much for some reason, but the European Union had a big consultation last year about the whole digitization of EU company law, and interestingly enough, they mentioned blockchain in there, for instance, for shareholder voting. So not only have online meetings of shareholders, but also about registering votes and everything, so that you just don't have a horrible paper or quasi-paper record as a PDF on your hard drive. That's one development that is coming there, which I find useful. But again, if more company law is digitized and is approachable via blockchain, then you have to make sure that you can comply with other legal provisions as well, especially, to my heart, the restructuring and bankruptcy provisions, because actually they help you. They help you to preserve value, or maybe get out of a bad situation, to kick out old shareholders, put new money in. So in a why create everything in a way that you are excluded from the benefits that the law might give you. Okay, So much to cover. That's the last thing I wanted to say. The European Parliament in 2016 issued a very nice, in a way, recommendation that they like blockchain, they like distributed ledger technology. There are some, of course, some risks involved, but it has the potential to alter fundamentally the way in which assets are transferred and records are kept. And that's where a bankruptcy lawyer has his alarm bells going off, because that's also relevant in that context. And the whole recommendation by the European Parliament is very nice, but they're not looking yet so much at the issue of rescue and bankruptcy, and that's probably something that has also be kept in mind. Almost a boring result that I'm coming to. Bankruptcy law is also relevant, of course, but that wasn't addressed there so much. But the whole report was very positive, and if you believe that by bankruptcy proceedings you can also preserve value, not only for shareholders and creditors and employees, but also for society, and I think that's a fair argument to make, then maybe that also has to be taken into account. And with this, I end my remarks, and I hope I didn't speak too long.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Maybe just wait a sec. Maybe there's some questions. I'm sure there are a lot of questions.
Hello, my name is Lucas.
Hi.
My question goes towards the point you're making of the problem of immutable contracts on the blockchain and DAOs. How do you see that in the context of new blockchain solutions coming out in the course of this year that implement government solutions as well? And about frameworks that make it possible to build constituted DAOs, which basically have a set of rules which imply of how to change their own rules.
From a legal perspective, that's great. I think if you are a blockchain purist, that's horrible. It depends on what you want. I mean, the idea of having something that's immutable, unstoppable, is of course also an anti-government argument. And if you like that, that's something you don't want to do away with. But if you believe that you can't really foresee the future and things might happen that you didn't think of, or things that you did think of but you didn't think were relevant, that's what we lawyers deal all the time with, that people agree on contracts and then later they said, oh my God, that's not what we meant. Right? And you wonder how this can still happen after, I don't know, 5,000 years of legal system, but it happens all the time. When the DAO hack happened, I have a nice quote by Vitalik Buterin where he said, human intent is inherently complex. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. If we are coding human intent here, it's going to be so messy. So I like the idea that things can be changed.
And that would solve the legal issue right now of unstoppable. It would infer certain technical problems that blockchain with hard-coded contracts has, or advantages that they have, but the legal problems would be solved.
You could then solve it. I mean, you would still have to make the change. There was, in 2016, one big misunderstanding. When people say code is law, and then they say my code is unstoppable and immutable, that's not what law is about. One of the key aspects of law is that it can be changed. Even the European contracts and the US Constitution can be changed. What cannot be changed is holy law, like the law of the gods, like be it natural law of the Catholics or Sharia law, all these religious law that were in a way given by God, those you cannot change, okay? You might interpret them, but human-made law is by nature changeable. So if you say we have something that cannot be changed, rules that cannot be changed, I would say that's not law then. Because law by its very nature is always changing. And then you always say you don't change it, right? It's forever, but human history has shown it can always be changed.
We need tools to always come to new rules of how we live together, basically.
Yes, right.
Thank you.
Thanks.